All right. Shall I get started?
Yes, please.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you so much for everybody coming on. My name is Mike Andrews. I'm a local licensed insurance agent and registered nurse here in Connecticut. Uh, been a nurse for the past 9 years, and I've been in insurance for the past 4 years. So this presentation is called the Medicare Made Simple. We're going to talk about the different parts of Medicare, how to enroll, when to enroll, and we're just going to go over the generalities of the different options. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I always like to show my family first, just to show everybody I'm just not an evil insurance agent. As you can see, my wife and my daughter are there, my grandmother. My daughter Jade is just turned 2 back in February. And a couple weeks actually found out we're having another one. So, and we're having another girl. So we're pretty excited about that.
Congratulations.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Definitely keeping busy over here. And I've been working, I was working as a nurse for 9 years and basically found out we were having a baby and my wife was going to be a stay-at-home mom. So I decided that, was I going to work 60 hours a week or more at the hospital until she's 18 or help people with their Medicare and do that. So that's why I decided to do help people with the Medicare process and education as well as choosing the different options. So how I help, so basically I just help you find a plan that fits your needs and preferences. Also applying for Medicare Part A and Part B. We go through that just so that way there's no guesswork when it comes down to it. And my job is to not just help you choose a plan and say, see you later. It's really to be a trusted and unbiased resource for all your Medicare plan needs as time goes on. I am licensed in Connecticut and Massachusetts, but predominantly I focus on Connecticut here. And I'm contracted with all the carriers except for Trinity Health, mainly because I was working for them. And my services are no cost. Original Medicare. So Original Medicare is through the private health insurance. It's a health insurance program through the government. It's for people that are 65 and above, or for individuals that have disabilities. So my youngest client is 21 years old, and my oldest client is 99 years old. So that kind of gives you a broad spectrum of how many how people can be on Medicare, on disability or 65. There are many cost gaps with original Medicare. So, for instance, you don't get any prescription drug coverage with original Medicare. And we'll get into what those co-insurances and co-pays look like. But the biggest key takeaway is if you just had your A and B card, you have no maximum out of pocket. So, basically there's no stop loss. So you really have the potential to be out, a significant amount of money. So I like to start off by talking about enrollment periods before we get into the Medicare copays and everything. Mainly because this is where you start. What do I do? How do I enroll? So for those that are turning 65, you have 3 months before, the month of, and 3 months after to basically enroll into Medicare Part A and Part B. Now, the initial enrollment period are for individuals that are, like I said, turning 65. Um, but just because you're turning 65 does not mean you have to sign up for Medicare. I know you've heard from maybe your family and friends, coworkers that if you don't enroll now, you'll get hit with the penalty. It's not necessarily true. So if you're in a situation where, say, if you're working or if you're married to your spouse and they're working and they have health insurance through an employer of 20 or more employees, then you necessarily don't have to take Medicare at this time. It just really becomes a numbers game, comparing what the costs would be. So I do those cost analyses with people that are considering retiring. However, if you're on Access LCT, or you work for a very small company of less than 20 employees, or if you have Medicaid, those are just a few of examples of that you need to take Medicare when you first turn 65. So that's just one thing to remember if you're getting ACA, which is the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, or if you are on Medicaid, or you have a small employer or self-employed, you have to go onto Medicare. And the easiest way to do that would be to apply on the Social Security website. I always encourage everybody, even if even just for your information, to create an SSA.gov account. because you'll be able to see what your income would be once you start taking Social Security. It'll tell you how much you'll be, receiving when you reach your full retirement age, or if you want to wait till you're 70. So it's a good login to have, and it's also the easiest way to apply for Medicare, which of course I help with that process as well. So still working after 65 and not ready for Medicare. So basically, the really only way that you would not have to sign up for Medicare once you turn 65 is if you're working. So if you have a job, or your spouse has a job and you have health insurance, you don't have to enroll into Medicare. Now, when the time does come to enroll, say, fast forward 3 years down the road, you're 68 years old, you want to retire, go on to Medicare. There's just an extra step that we have to do, and that's basically getting a couple forms filled out by your HR department at your job. And once you have those forms, we can apply. I always tell people, reach out to me at least 3 months before you're deciding to retire, just so that way we can make that process run as smooth as possible. Because really, what happens is Social Security, sometimes they are very slow because of the lack of help that they currently have now, especially during the end of the year. So I encourage people to really get the ball rolling 2 to 3 months, no less than 2 months before they retire. And then AEP, that's open enrollment. So that's for people that are already on Medicare. Okay. So this is the time that you can make a plan change. So you can change from, we'll get to the Medicare Advantage plans and the supplements in a few minutes, but this is the time you can make any change to your plan. And the caveat is there's only a 7 week window between October 15th and December 7th that you can make this happen. So as you can tell, this is almost like a tax season on steroids. So you have 7 weeks where you can get your plan changes done. And then whatever change that you make will be effective for January 1st. So this is a good time if you, say, are on expensive prescription medications, you want to see if there's a plan that's better for you. That's where I would come in and help you go through those options. So the four parts of Medicare. So what you get from the government are Part A and Part B. Everything else you've ever heard of. Part C, also known as Medicare Advantage plans, prescription drug plans, supplements, those come from private health insurance companies only. What you get from the government is Part A and Part B. So what Medicare covers, so Part A, it's when if you get your Medicare card, it'll say Part A, and then it should say Part B as well if you took Part B. Now, Part A is hospital, but when you think of Part A, I think of admission, right? Because you have to, it's an admission to a hospital. You're being admitted to a skilled nursing facility, which is like a short-term rehab. It's not necessarily a nursing home, it's just a short-term rehab. Hospice care, that's for end-of-life care, some home health care if you have a visiting nurse. Now, Part B is everything else, more like outpatient stuff. So those are all your doctor's visits, your blood work, your EKGs, MRIs, outpatient surgeries. You get that knee replacement, you go home the same day. That's under Part B. And a lot of all preventative services as well. So just to give you some examples of the preventative services with Medicare. So basically, you get your colorectal, your cancer screenings, your PSA tests, cardiovascular screenings, all those different things, which are no cost to you. So what's not covered by Medicare? Well, the whole cost of your care. Basically, Medicare is not free. You're paying a premium for it, number one, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And number two, there's copays associated with it. It is not long-term care or custodial care. So if you are in a situation where you need some help, physical help, you need somebody to live with you, you need a visiting nursing assistant, whatever it may be, homemaker, Medicare will not cover that. Ancillary products. So those are some examples, you see on TV. Joe Namath talks about them. I'm sure you guys seen those commercials. I can't be specific on the educational, but we all know what those extra benefits are. And care received outside the United States. So if you're on vacation somewhere out of the country, Medicare will not cover you. So like I said, when you think of Part A, think of admission. You're being admitted to the hospital or skilled nursing facility. So this is just Medicare, Part A and Part B. You never got a supplement, you never got a drug plan, you never got an Advantage plan. You just wanted to stick with your Part A and your Part B card. So for Part A, when you go to the hospital, you pay 1,600 or 1,676 the moment you're admitted to the hospital, whether they're there for 1 day or 10 days. Um, and that resets every 2 months. That's not a yearly deductible. That's a benefit period. So if you were really unlucky, went to the hospital 3 or 4 times a year, and they were all outside that 60-day window, you'll pay 1676 each time. And if you're in the hospital for longer than 60 days, that's when you start paying anywhere from $400 to $800 a day. For skilled nursing facilities, so say you get discharged from the hospital, you're not quite well enough to go home, but not sick enough to stay at the hospital. So maybe you have to go to a short-term rehab for maybe a week or two. There, the first 20 days, there's no cost. However, days 21 through 100, it's about $209 or $209.50 per day through days 21 through 100. And then days 101 beyond, you're responsible for all costs. Medicare will recognize that as more of a long-term care type of situation. And then part B, I just tell people think, oh boy, because it's everything else. Oh, I need a glucometer. I need to get that MRI. I need to get that darn hip replaced. And the doctor says I'm going to go home the same day. So that falls under part B. And part B, it's simply there's a small deductible. This year it's $257, and then you pay 20% of all costs. Now, remember, there's no stop loss to Medicare. So 20% of use your imagination. It can be a lot of money. Um, Part B does have a premium. Now, there's a monthly cost for Part B. Most people don't have a monthly cost for Part A because we've paid into that with our FICA taxes, or if you had a spouse that paid into that with your FICA taxes, that happens automatically. But Part B, most people do have a premium. And that premium this year for most people is $185 a month. Could be more or less depending on a little something called IRMA, which is the income related monthly adjustment amount. Basically, what that means is that Medicare does a 2-year look back, and depending on your income, you might pay more or less for your Part B premium. And it gets recalculated every 2 years, so that way, if your income decreases, then your Part B won't be um, even higher. And again, there's no max amount of pocket for Part B or for Part A. This is a chart for Irma. Don't memorize this. Don't write this down. You could take a photo of it if you want, but I just wanted to show you that, of course, with anything in life, the more you make, or anything with taxes, the more you make, the more they take, right? So if you could tell here under, if you look under file joint tax return, so if you're married, even if your spouse is not going on to Medicare, your spouse could be 30 years younger than you, they're still going to take their spouse into account, or the income into account. So if your combined income was $212,000 back in 2023, you can expect to pay that 185, or I'm sorry, yeah, that 185, and that would be for each person if they're on Medicare. And of course, if you start getting past that, if you're a big time earner making $750,000 or more, your Part B premium can be all the way up to $628.90. Now, a lot of people, when they're retiring, their income is going to drop drastically. So what I do a lot of times is I'll help people appeal their Medicare IRMA. And I would say that probably a good 8 or 9 out of 10 people are successful with it. If they can't knock it down to the 185, they can at least knock it down a couple notches. And the cost for IRMA also contributes to your Part D prescription drug premium. So, say if you have a prescription drug plan and the plan, say, is $30 a month, if you just have a Part D drug plan, then you could potentially pay that plan premium on top of those additional costs that you see on the far right in blue. So we just kind of went through Medicare relatively quickly. The biggest takeaway that I always tell people is just remember that Medicare, if you just run naked with your Part A and your Part B card, you'll have no drug coverage. You'll have no other benefits to help you see, chew, or hear, and also you won't you'll there'll be no maximum out of pocket. So you definitely want to make sure that you want to choose a supplement or an advantage plan to protect you against that cost. But I just tell people that you're basically responsible for 20% of all your healthcare costs with no maximum out of pocket if you just have your Medicare card A and B alone. So what coverage is best for me or for you? Now, we were before we jumped on, we were talking about what the best plan is. And there's really no best plan. It just depends on your doctors, your meds, your specific situation, and what your medical needs are as far as supplies or how often you're going to the doctors. So I always tell people it's like kind of choosing a car or truck. There's really no better option. I mean, some of you probably disagree, but you can get a really cool car or you can get a really cool truck that'll work for you. Um, and the little fine print at the bottom here, Part B deductible only applies. So there's old plans called C and F. They're supplements. Those that are born past 1955, or I'm sorry, that are younger. Um, if they turn 65, 1955 or before, they can enroll into this plan. If not, if you weren't, then you wouldn't be able to. So that brings me to supplemental insurance. That's what I was just talking about with the C and the F. So a supplement is not an advantage plan. A supplement is its own thing. So basically, what it does is it ultimately, for the most part, pays that 20% gap. So basically, with a supplement, you keep your original Medicare A and B. You purchase an additional policy, Medicare supplement through an insurance company, pay a monthly premium for it. But when you go to when you go to the doctors or the hospital, you have very little to no bill. Also, if you have a supplemental, if you go that route, you need to choose a drug plan as well. And you might be saying, well, I don't take any medications. But the problem is that if you are, say, in the middle of June and you get a heart attack and now your doctor's saying you have to be put on Eliquis, that's a blood thinner and it's a name brand medication. It's a tier 3, which is a name brand medication. And if you didn't have coverage, you might have to pay out of pocket fully for it. I think that med specifically can be anywhere from like $600 to $800 a month currently, from the last time I looked. But basically, the key takeaways: if you do the supplement, you're going to pay more per month, but when you go to the hospital or the doctors, you'll pay very little to no out of pocket. Um, they are the plans are the same no matter what company you go with. I just help basically find a plan that, obviously you don't want to go with the cheapest because sometimes they increase their rates dramatically, and you don't want to go obviously with the most expensive. You want to go with one that's more reputable, that might be around in a few years, of course, and also the one that doesn't, increase their rates significantly year to year. Um, if any of you have an HSA, so I should have mentioned this before, but if you have an HSA and you're going to continue to work, you need to stop your contribution 6 months before you take any part of Medicare. So this is only if you're going to work past 65. So if you have an HSA and you're going to retire at 65, you do not have to stop your contributions. But if you're 67 years old, going to be retiring, and you have an HSA, you got to stop your contributions. There's some tax penalties associated with it. So for an HSA, you can't pay your supplement premiums with HSA funds. Again, this is another fun chart to look at. But as you can see at the above, there's all different plans: A, B, L, M. Oops, sorry about that. F, G, N, all of those. Basically, the more comparable plans or the more comprehensive plans are G and N. There you get the most coverage for what you're paying. I always recommend those. And as you can see, it covers pretty much, or the G covers pretty much everything except that Part B deductible, which is only $257 this year. After that, with the Plan G, you'll hardly ever get a bill if you go to the doctors at the hospital. And you have no network. So you can see any doctor in the country that takes Medicare without referrals. Now, Medicare Advantage plan is on the other side. Now we'll talk about, so we were just talking about the truck, now we're talking about the car. So Medicare Advantage, in simpler terms, it's technically not the case, but the best way to think about it is they're taking the benefits you get from Part A, from Part B, and if some of the plans have prescription drug coverage, which they usually do, they basically combine all of these, roll them up, and then create their own copay and co-insurance systems. So these plans are very similar to what we're used to working for an employer. A lot of the times you'll pay, a copay to see your doctors, pay a copay to the hospital. There's a maximum out of pocket. So basically, if you have the worst year of your life, you at least know that you're protected against the stop loss. But basically, these are offered by private health insurance companies, just like the supplements. They can be an HMO or PPO. Basically, what that means is HMO, you have your network of doctors. There's really no flexibility to go out of network. Now, if you have a PPO, you still have your network of doctors, but it's a lot more flexible. You'll just have to pay more. And then again, they often include the ancillary products that Joe Namath always talks about. And like I said, you pay as you go. So you pay co-pays as you go. So this is good. This might be good for people that maybe go to the doctor once or twice a year. Um, just, maybe looking for some extra benefits because they're not really using it for their health coverage. But if you've got a lot of issues, then this may not be the best option for you. Um, and a lot of these plans do cost $0 monthly. I'm not going to say they're free because we all know that nothing's for free. There's, stipends and that, the government gives basically these insurance companies to take over as your primary payer. But you can always go back to original Medicare during open enrollment. So whatever option you go with, you're never locked in for life. But basically, the Medicare Advantage plans, the best way to think about this is that you don't pay anything additional per month, but you pay copays as you go. Maybe $40 to $50 for a specialist. A lot of the plans, maybe you'll not pay anything for a primary care, sometimes $5 or $10. But they all change every year, so we'll know what those newer plans are looking like towards the end of the year. And then Part D, and we just talked about that, but basically a Part D standalone drug plan is what you will need to get in additional to your supplement if you want to stay with original Medicare. And they can also only be purchased through private health insurance companies. And of course, it's advantageous you get on a drug plan as soon as you're planning to go onto Medicare because you want to avoid penalties. If you sign up for Medicare and your Part B starts, if you go 63 days without prescription drug coverage, then you will have a lifelong enrollment or a lifelong penalty for that. Prescription drug costs are capped at $2,000 for the year. So what that means is that if you had a really, if you take a lot of expensive medications, I have clients that are on, say, for instance, anti-neoplastic, so like cancer medications or anti-organ rejection drugs. Those are the medications that are thousands of dollars a month. But as long as you're on the formulary of whatever plan you have, you're capped at 2,000 for the year. So that's been a godsend to a lot of people. Medicare Savings Program. So Medicare Savings Programs, they're available in most states. Here in Connecticut, it's very specific. It's income based only. So it doesn't matter if you have a house and a car, whatever it may be, retirement account, it only goes by income. So for instance, if your income, and that includes your Social Security, if you're single and your income is less than, say, 3,200, you can qualify for a level assistance that could not only help with, say, paying for, towards your prescription medications, but also can help pay that Part B premium. And if your income is below like a 2,600 threshold, you could possibly get on a plan that, gives you more benefits that you're not paying for. So there's a lot of different um, options out there if you have a lower income. And of course, if you have a regular income too. Um, like I said, that extra help is a state-run program. As long as your income is below those two thresholds, single or married, you're perfectly fine. Um, and that's something that Department of Social Services. So we send in an application to them. It's like a two-page application, and they say yes or no. So I help clients with that. So getting started, you don't have to, first I want to say is you don't have to work with an agent. You can do this all yourself. You can, try to reach out to somebody at your senior center. That's perfectly fine. But just one thing to remember is it's my job is to just make sure that I know all the changes that are happening and everything else. So if any of you have questions or family, you can always just reach out to me. Even if you're a state employee, you're most likely going to get a good option through them, but I'm still happy to talk about the process and what to expect and really just be a resource for anything Medicare for you and your friends and family. Um, so yeah, that was a pretty quick presentation. Again, this is more of like dipping your toes in the water. It really just comes down to your specific situation and the timeline that you're following as far as, when to enroll or if you need to enroll. So, I mean, we have a pretty small group here. So if anybody had any questions,